Welcome to Textile Talks. Thank you all for being here. This is Amy Milne, and I'm the Executive Director of the Quilt Alliance. And I'm here this week. I'm connecting from Helsinki, Finland. I think I saw at least one person in the chat who's connecting from Helsinki. Tell us where you are today and where you're connecting from. We'd love to know. We'd love to hear what kind of textiles you're interested in. Are you a maker? Are you an enthusiast? Tell us a little bit about yourself. I would especially like to know, since we're going to be talking to Phyllis Wong today, who's going to talk about her book and her research on the Gossard girls of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So any UP residents in the on the call today, we'd love to hear from you, or just Michiganders in general. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for making time to be with us. And I want to tell you a little bit about Textile Talks. If you're new to Textile Talks, which I hope we do have some new viewers today, Textile Talks is brought to you each week on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Right now, we're in Daylight Savings Time. And it's brought to you by the Quilt Alliance, who I represent, and our partners at the International Quilt Museum, Studio Art Quilt Associates, or SAQA, and Surface Design Association. All of the Textile Talks are recorded. So if one of my colleagues, Lucy or Emma, could put the link to the YouTube playlist for all the recordings in the chat box now, we'd love to invite you to go to that playlist to rewatch some of your favorite Textile Talks, or catch ones that maybe you missed. It's a really great way to archive our program. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Quilts Alliance, because our guest today, Phyllis Wong, it won't be demonstrating one of our Quilt Alliance projects, but her project is very story-based, and I think you're going to absolutely love it. And I hope that you will chime in the chat at any point and keep this program lively and interactive. We really welcome that. The Quilt Alliance mission is to document, preserve, and share the stories of all quilts and all quilt makers. And our projects include those in the slide here: QSOS, or Quilters Save Our Stories. It's a collection of oral history interviews with quilters, archived with our partners at the Library of Congress and the University of Kentucky. And QSOS was launched 25 years ago in 1999. And that the website is listed here on the slide. You can view over 1,200 interviews, watch or read over 1,200 oral history interviews. And then Go Tell It is our video documentation project. And anyone who would like to share a quilt story can participate. You don't have to be a maker. You can be a collector, a fan. You can just own a quilt that's special to you that you want to talk about to record it. Go Tell It. So you can find out more information on our website, and you can watch examples of the Go Tell It's on our YouTube channel. And we would love to have you as a member. And it's a great time to be a member, because when you join for as little as $30 a year, you can be signed up for a new to us block of the month project by Aurifil. It's an applique project. So check us out at quiltalliance.org, and we'd love to have your support. That's how we do what we do, is with support from folks like you. I want to say really quickly too, if you want to tell where you're from, or what kind of textiles that you're interested in, use the chat box for that. If you have questions for our speaker, please put those in the Q&A box, so that we can keep track of all the questions. The chat tends to just scroll by, and we lose track of all the questions if they're not in the Q&A. And if you would like to use captions, just click on the closed captions, it's the CC button or live captions. And I wanted to mention, did you know that there is actually a live human being typing the captions live as we carry out our programs? That's something that we invested in a while ago as a group, and we find that the captioning is much better than what YouTube or the auto captioning feature. So do use live captioning if it's something that you would like to benefit from. Okay. So we are really thrilled to have Phyllis Michael Wong here with us today. And we owe a big thank you, I want to say, to Patty Tourville for introducing us to Phyllis and her research. Patty is one of the sponsors of Textile Talks, and she said, this is a really fascinating story, and I think our audience would appreciate it, and I think she is very right. Phyllis Michael Wong is a native of the San Francisco Bay Area, and she would follow her father's sage advice of listen, talk little, listen. She followed this in her roles as a historian and educator, including as a writing instructor and director of online learning, and 30-year member of the university-level academic world, including as First Lady at Northern Michigan University from 2004 to 12, and San Francisco State University from 2012 to 19. Among her favorite First Lady accomplishments are co-founding a One Book, One Community county-wide reading program at NMU and pioneering an inclusive student-run fashion show at SFSU that brought together students with disabilities, faculty, fashion industry professionals, and community members. That sounds really cool. Mm-hmm. So I would like to invite Phyllis to go ahead and turn on her camera. I might have to ask you to start since I turned it off earlier. There you are. Hi, Phyllis.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. Before I turn it over to you, I want to say thank you for being here today. And I want to mention your book, which is published by MSU Press, Michigan State University Press. And Emma's going to add the link for Phyllis's book in the chat now so that you'll know where to find it. We'll add it to the chat later so that you will have that. And I also want to say that we will have time for questions at the end of Phyllis's presentation. So stick around if you have a question. But as we're watching, feel free to go ahead and enter that question in the Q&A box. And if it's something, if it's a web address or something like that, we may be able to answer it on the fly. But I'm going to turn it over to you now, Phyllis, and turn my screen sharing off. And I'll give you a minute to turn yours on.
Okay. I should turn it on?
Yes, you're going to turn on your screen sharing.
Okay, here we go. Here we go.
How's
that?
Oh, yeah, you nailed it. All right. Thank you, Phyllis. I'm going to turn my camera and mic off for now. And thank you for being here.
You bet. Thank you. I have some thank yous for a number of people. I'm so honored to be here today, but a special thanks to Amy and for those kind remarks, and to Lucy and Emma for help setting things up, to Patty Tourville, a friend and a quilt artist in her own right. But mostly, thank you to Quilt Alliance members who are logged in over Zoom today, and as I watch from all different parts of our world. This is absolutely wonderful. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the folks from Northern Michigan University, the folks from San Francisco State University, and Connecticut College in New London for their support. I have been working on this since about 2007, and as I moved from one institution to the next, I had great support and great help. I'd like to set a context. You see there on your screen in this first slide, you see the title, but you also see two factories. So I think a little bit of background is in order as we move forward to hear a little bit about this history. In 1901, a man by the name of Henry Williamson Gossard, who was a Chicago-based entrepreneur, he saw an opportunity to bring the latest French Paris wearing, to bring the latest French lingerie styles to the US market when he saw an actor called Sarah Bernhardt perform on stage. She was wearing a new piece of technology. In those days, that new technology was called a front lacing corset. I chuckle at that every time I say it. Thus began a company known today as the Gossard. Then, it was a century ago, it was known as the H.W. Gossard Company. And it had multiple factories, especially in the Midwest where it began. It had factories in Canada, Australia, and the UK. I see that we have some people from the UK. Hopefully we have some people also from Australia. Today, I'd like to start by saying many quilts have a story. I know that you know this. And quilts tell stories. Today, we will see 6 quilts made from Gossard undergarment remnants, fabric remnants. We will see images of workers and hear stories from and about assembly line workers. These were women who sewed corsets and bras in 2 factories, the 2 factories that you see there on your screen. The quilts and the stories document 6 decades when rural women supported their families, supported downtown male businesses, because mind you, this was as early as 1920 when businesses were owned by men primarily, and when women stuck up for their rights. One moment, please, while I silence something. All right, I'm sorry. The next slide, I wanted to, for those of you who are not from Michigan or have never been to Michigan, I wanted to set the context for the location of these 2 factories. Michigan is a very interesting place. It's a place that's comprised of 2 land masses, as you can see in the green outline of the 2 land masses, the Upper Peninsula for the top one and the Lower Peninsula. Michigan's Upper Peninsula is especially interesting because it's a large piece of land. It actually represents about 30% of the entire state's land area. But its population, though, is sizably different. In 1920, it was 11% of the state's total population, but today it's only 3%. It's a place, as I often tell people with a smile, it's a place where Mother Nature dominates human nature. It is quite beautiful. And you see in the photo there a little bit of Lake Superior. One day where I was doing some writing in the Upper Peninsula, I happened to walk out to this place called Presque Isle before sunrise and was greeted by a beautiful sun rising and a place that had lots of water. It had rained the night before. I'm going to tell you a very short story because story is what makes up the beauty of this adventure of mine, this journey of mine. So I walked out and I was looking at the sun, and all of a sudden I hear a voice behind me saying, "Oh, did you notice that piece of water, that water there in that depression? If you look closely at it, very closely, it's really a crude outline of Michigan's Upper Peninsula." I turned around and I looked at the person. It was a woman, and she proceeded to talk to me. I didn't know her. To me, she was a stranger at the time, but that's what Yoopers do. They talk to each other. But I learned that she knew who I was, and she had known my husband, who was the president there at San Francisco State. So you never know what you're going to learn when someone talks to you. As you see, the towns where these 2 factories were situated were not very large, but they were very successful. The first quilt I would like to share with you is what I call a doll quilt. The owner is Marilyn Andrew, and the quilt was actually quite small. The Gossard remnants that you see are those light pink or actually orange. I'm not exactly sure what color to call them around. Those are the Gossard remnants that someone, maybe an aunt or someone else, made. Marilyn wasn't sure when she gave me this quilt, but it was a doll quilt that she received and she treasured for many years until she and I met together. I have Marilyn Andrew to thank for really helping me spread the word, or helping me spread the words of the Gossard girls out into the Upper Peninsula. Marilyn asked me to come and give a talk, and I gave a talk at the Ishpeming Public Library, which is only a couple of blocks from Ishpeming's factory, which at its height had about 600 workers in it, which was very, very large. So I gave a talk. I walked in, I sat at the lectern, and I was giving my talk, and I happened to look to my right, and on this table was filled with Gossard artifacts. What had happened is that the people who came were so excited to hear about the history, people who loved what they did, that they wanted to give me these pieces of Gossard artifacts. So they did. So I was given a number of things, among them the doll quilt, some thread, scissors, all kinds of things. What you see in front of you, though, at the end of my talk, I asked those in the audience to raise their hand and say if they were a Gossard worker. What do you think happened? Yep, lots of people raised their hand. I was in the right place at the right time. And so I asked these people to introduce themselves and to talk about a sentence or two about what they did at the Gossard, and they did. I was so excited, so excited to meet these people. I asked them to stay on, and I have this lovely photo, which you see. And if you look in the first row, all the way to the right, you will see a picture of Marilyn Andrew, the kind person who gave me my first Gossard quilt. I wanted to show you a close-up of this quilt so you could really appreciate the beauty of it, and particularly the center of it, that someone would spend so much time doing I believe that is cross-stitched, or in the middle there, and then those beautiful blocks that have patterns on them for a doll quilt. Marilyn loved this quilt and spent a long time talking to me about the quilt and about her mother, who never worked at the Gossard. But what she did tell me was that her mother came from a famous family. Because these factories were in small towns, relatives might work at the factory. And so Marilyn's came from a family called the Swanson clan. And the Swanson clan had 5 siblings, of which they all worked at the Gossard company. In this next slide, my book, in the beginning of the book, I have this sentence: you will never know what someone is thinking unless you give them a voice. It's a powerful thought, and if you spend time thinking about it, what does it mean to give someone a voice? It means that when we listen to someone, we're not busy thinking about what we want to say back to them, but we are completely absorbed in their story from their point of view. And that's what I tried to do in this book, in interviewing over 100 piece rate workers to gather their stories and have an understanding of what it was like. I'd like to tell you quickly about each of these women these are women that I interviewed. Anita is an example of a person who went to work right out of high school. But in Anita's case, her mother didn't want her to go. Anita told me, my mom said, I should not go there. I don't know how, she said, you don't know how to sew. But Anita wanted to make her own money. So she said, well, at least I'm going to try. She did. She stayed. She worked there twice. The second time she worked was when her husband was out of work. And so her wages really, really helped the family. The second woman, Madeline Del Bello, if she was 4 feet tall, that was tall. She was a dynamo and she could talk. She was a person, though, unlike Anita, who already had children. But her husband was only doing seasonal work, and so the family really needed more money. Her husband was a miner. Many of these women were married to miners in the area. So Madeline Del Bello heard about the factory in Gwyn opening up in about 1946, 1947. And so that's when she went there to try to apply. And so she was hired. She worked there the first day to the last day. And when I interviewed Madeline, she showed me her hand. She held up her hand, and in her hand, she pointed to a spot between her thumb and her finger there, and there was a huge dent in there, a depression. And she says, that's what happened. I worked every day for 18 years. I didn't care. I took care of my family. I took care of my children. That was okay. The next woman, Ruth Fagerberg, also worked in Gwyn. She worked there right out of high school. But Ruth was a woman who looked me in the eye one day when I was interviewing her and said, I was from a poor family. I said, what do you mean you were from a poor family? She said, well, when I went to school, I could tell by the clothes my other classmates were wearing that they were more wealthier than we were. And Ruth then said, do you know what happened on my first day? I said, no, what happened? She said, well, my first day at the Gwyn factory, which was in 1946, she says, I was so excited I could go there, I could walk there. That was really, really nice. But when I got to the Gwyn factory, she said, and it was time to go down for lunch, she was very ashamed because she was bringing a homemade sandwich on homemade bread. And she felt that that was a sign of someone who showed that they weren't of means. They didn't have much money. Ruth remained there and became quite a good seamstress. And in fact, one of the things I remember about Ruth is that she remembers about the Gossard girls and what they did. She says, we made our money. Think about that. It was my money. It wasn't my husband's money. Very, very powerful. The last woman I want to tell you about is much like Madeline. She went to work at the factory in 47 because she needed to work. Her husband was a miner, but they were on strike, and so somebody needed to bring in some money. Turns out that Helmi was really, really good. She was one of the most experienced, skilled piece rate workers. So skilled that when she had an interaction with her boss and was trying, and he told her in no uncertain terms, listen, Helmi, you are never going to make $2 an hour like the men make. Helmi sat there. She didn't say anything after she told me that. So I said to her, Helmi, what did you do? How did you respond? She looked me in the eye and she said, you don't say anything. I shut up. It wasn't always easy. If you were good, there were things that would not be working in your favor, and that would be a manager that would sometimes change the value of the units that you completed. We are on to this next Gossard quilt, which was given to me recently. The donor, the person who made this, is anonymous. I was not allowed to ask the person who gave me the quilt, who made the quilt, how it was made, how the years. We did guess that it was made probably sometime between 1930 and 1970 and 1940. It's a very large quilt, as you can see by the size there. And it is a block pattern, and it's peach colored, but many other different shades in there, which I think make this quilt sort of sparkle and come up and make us see it differently. Oops, hold on a second here. All right. I wanted to give you a close-up of this quilt so you could see for yourself the different kinds of fabrics, undergarment fabrics, that would have gone into making bras and corsets and girdles. You can see that as you look at them. Again, I think that this is a lovely, lovely quilt. I like the fact that it's been tied with a piece of yarn, which really makes those squares just stick out that much more. I'd like to move on to talking about a very, very special quilt, actually, that is documented in my book, and I believe it's in chapter 8. I want to give you a little bit of a backstory about this. What you see there in front of you are the 4 quilters who collectively made this quilt in probably within 3 months. So, and as you are looking at them, there is one woman in there that I did discover, not right away, that was a former Gossard girl. Can you imagine how excited I was when I learned that one of those workers was a Gossard girl? In 2010, I was a speaker for Women's History Month at Northern Michigan University, where I was asked to talk about the Gossard girls and the history of them. And while I was there, at the end of my talk, a woman came up to me. She had a cardboard box, and she hands me this box. I said, "What is this?" Well, she says, "These are Gossard remnants, and I don't have any use for them. I want you to have them. You can figure out something to do with them." I was never one to turn down receiving Gossard memorabilia. I took it as a personal quest of mine to preserve as much as I could and to leave things at the Marquette Regional History Center, where there are many pieces of them today. So she gave me this box. I left, and this was probably in about April. I left and began thinking and ruminating and wondering, what could I do with this box that was filled with these remnants? I would continue to go on and to give talks at other places like the PEO and actually at the Ishpeming Business Association, all the while thinking, what could happen? Well, I came up with the idea of a Gossard quilt. I felt that a Gossard quilt and bringing people together who did not know anything about the Gossard history, except for Chris Week, the one who did work there, would be a good way to help these Gossard girls tell their stories. And so I found 3 other women, one from Negaunee, one actually from Gwynn, and one from Marquette. They didn't know each other, but they agreed that they would get together and figure out how to create a Gossard quilt. It wasn't easy, Chris Week told me, to figure this out because Chris, you see, had an idea. She wanted the remnants to be made into actually the actual corset. So the quilt would be in the shape of a corset. However, the 3 other women there had a different idea. They felt that the Gossard pieces, the remnants, should be made into a quilt. That would much better tell the story of the Gossard factory. And so Chris agreed. She felt that that was really the better idea. What you see in front of you right now is a front panel and a back side of the Gossard quilt so that you can actually see all of the detail in this particular quilt. It really is quite extraordinary. And Chris Week, who actually owned the Viking Sewing Center in Marquette, she's since passed, a quilt artist herself. She made extraordinary quilts. She repaired sewing machines, so she knew quite a bit. And she also worked at the Gossard for a couple of years. So she had experience working there with making piece rate work, wages. And at some point, she decided to quit. And then she wanted to open up her own business, which she did. So in her store, she had, and I'm sure many of you know about this, I don't know anything about it, these machines in which you can plug in and draw a design on them, and then figure out how the shape of what you want on a piece of material. Well, that's what Chris did. She figured this out on her long arm machine. And if you look closely at the panel, the right side to the left, you can see that Chris added a little touch there at the top of the corset, made with some rolled, looks to be like satin for the corset. And then the back side of the quilt, which is quite beautiful in its simplicity. So as I mentioned earlier, this cardboard box had quite a journey. One of its stops along the way was a stop at Quilt Show, the regional quilt show in Marquette, where it was put on display and where it earned a special award for the work that had been done on it. Chris Week was really surprised. She was surprised that the path of the quilt came full circle and that we had found everyone who touched it over the 40 years, including, as you look at this photo in front of you, the woman in the hot pink jacket standing next to me in the orange jacket. Karen Johnson was the person who had given me this box. I didn't remember her name when she gave it to me after the talk. I was just so excited, and I didn't hear from her. The only time I ever ran into her was when I went to this quilt show, and fate, you know, in the chaos of life, things happen. She was there, and we were all very, very excited to see each other. And she was especially happy because she could see that the Gossard remnants, which she had donated, had been used in a most beautiful, beautiful way. So, as I said, that Gossard box, or the contents of the Gossard box, kept moving around Marquette. On May 8th, for a month, there was an article in the newspaper because the library in Marquette asked to have the quilt displayed for a month. And the number of people that would rifle through, imagine that, at the library. Many people who had no idea about this history. And there was a little panel next to it that I had written up which told about the history. And then they got to examine the quilt. So again, the Gossard girls must have been so happy that there were more and more people learning about their history. There was also a letter to the editor from the woman who actually originally had this cardboard box that she had put in as part of an estate sale in which Karen Johnson then purchased at the estate sale. It was a box actually that had flour sacks because Karen would use those flour sacks to make dresses for Muslim dresses for people. I'm still amazed how this quilt had the ability to go around the area and have people take a look and think about and hear a little bit about this history. The next Gossard quilt I'd like to talk about is another special one. It's a quilt that connected sisters to their Aunt Marie Robar, who was a Gossard girl. And usually when I did interviews, it was because someone had called me to then talk to someone, give someone a call on the phone, and that's how I would set up interviews for all of these people. In this situation here with these two women, it was different. One day, Virginia Robar Johnson called me at my house in Marquette. She called me because she had a quilt and she wanted me to take a look at the quilt, and she wanted to bring her sister. Now, these two women were retired. They lived about, an hour's drive from Marquette, but they were willing to drive to the Peter White Library, where we had a lovely conversation and an interview, and where I learned that this quilt had such special, special memories for these women who didn't have an easy life. But at some point, Virginia said, I knew that this quilt was special. She would take it out and look at it. And at one point, she had enough nerve to fix it and have someone help her put the quilt back together. Marie Robar's story is a story that the sisters told me in somber voices. This is a close-up of the quilt, and I will tell you a bit about her story. Marie Robar had a tough life, and when she graduated from high school, somehow she found her way to Washington State. She left her family. And then at some point she married, and she and her husband, this is during the Depression, mind you, would hop the rails and head back. They would head back to the UP. When these newlyweds headed back there was no housing for them. They had no place to stay. So Virginia's father said that he could stay in an outhouse that she had where there was no running water, no electricity. So that is where they stayed and existed until Marie finally took off. She left her husband for a short period of time, took off for Detroit to make some money, where he followed her. And the good part of this story is that they got back together and ended up back in Gwyn, where she worked in the Gwyn factory, and where Aunt Marie would, for the rest of her life, continue to help take care of and enjoy time with her nieces, Virginia and Karen. Okay, I will move quickly here. This next quilt that I have is called Great Alma's Quilt. Again, someone sought me out. I got a phone call and was asked to go to a woman's house to see this quilt. And this quilt was in possession of Kathleen Fredrickson, who told me about her grandmother, Senya. Senya, who worked really in the early years of the Ishpeming in Gossard. Her grandmother didn't have to work. And that was the case for some people. Not everybody had to work, but she loved to work. She wanted to make money. So she, with the Gossard remnants that she had, she gave them to her sister, who then started putting together this quilt. But Aunt Alma died, and then at that point, that is when Kathleen came into possession of the quilt, where she would then find a friend and put it together. It took 5 decades, Kathleen told me, because the quilt was passed from one family member to another. Kathleen said she was so surprised because her family just didn't care about this kind of stuff. She was so glad that she had the opportunity to complete it in 2006. As you can see from the close-up of the squares there, again, monogram look, but the print and the plain squares really add complexity, and it makes it look quite pleasing. My last Gossard quilt. I just got this one, I think in November 2000, last November in 2023. This Gossard quilt actually was on the wall in the Gossard factory at the time, on the second floor, where there were other things on that floor. At this particular time, so say about 1980, 2 individuals, Paul Arsenault and Sandy Arsenault, purchased the former Gossard factory. It was up for sale. The factory closed in 1976, and it sat vacant for a while, and then Paul took it over, and then slowly brought businesses in, and his wife, Sandy, began gathering Gossard artifacts and putting them out in this 3-story, 4-story building for people when they came in to see the work. And this was one of the things. This was on the second floor of the factory. Why is this important? This is important that it was on the second floor of the factory because this was one of 2 assembly line floors. And I wanted to show you these 2 slides so that you could see what it looked like in this factory. And I'd like to read to you a little bit. This was the larger factory, 600 workers. The one in Gwyn was about 150. So please indulge me a moment while I read to you. Imagine the constant noise from hundreds of industrial sewing machines with 2, 4, 6, 8, 12 needle industrial machines being pushed to their limit daily. Imagine the deafening silence when the electricity for all the machines was turned off at 10 a.m., when operators oiled their tired machines, removed lint from them, and operators replenished themselves with a Coke or a snack. Imagine Imagine female department heads transporting unfinished and finished garments in wood boxes, which you can see on the left-hand side there, edges of them, that were mounted on 3 rotating wheels. That was important, on a maple wood flooring. Now imagine a machine operator losing her focus momentarily, only to find a needle lodged in her finger or some other unimaginable place. Imagine, more importantly, as one Gossard girl told me, Cecilia Kanga, she says, imagine the girl sitting next to you and doing the same work as you is trying to beat you, to see if she can make more than you. Piece rate work requires strategic planning, focus, and resilience. Time means money in a piece rate environment. This is a close-up of Elma's quilt that was hanging on the wall, but again, you can see the different kinds of materials that were used to create beautiful Gossard undergarments. This is one of the women that I had to interview. I can see that I'm kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to go pretty quickly through these slides. And I'm sorry, I've talked so much, but I hope that you will understand that I am here because of these women, of their stories, of these remarkable people. The Gossard Company was also a very good company. They sponsored annual picnics, and they actually had those until the Union came in 1949, and then they were discontinued. One of the picnics in 1947 was pretty dramatic. Both factories had the joint picnic, in which case they also had some competitions throughout the day, because it was a day of festivities, food, music, dancing, and baseball games. But these women won the competitive game for the Ishpeming factory against the Gossard factory. And a woman who you see in the middle there, Denise Winson, was crowned Gossard Queen. You can read more about this in the book. There was also piece rate work in boxing. Here you see Rose Colick packaging a particular kind of bra in a particular box using particular instructions. I would be remiss if I didn't show you this slide here to give you an idea of the power of the collective work of the women that worked in the factory in Ishpeming and Gwyn. The governor candidate, George Romney, campaigned in Ishpeming in 1962. Imagine you're one of the workers there, and the gubernatorial candidate comes there. No mind that you might not be a Republican or a Democrat, but just to have someone come there and recognize the work that you did. That's awesome. Gossard remnants also were used to make wedding dresses. And here you see the lace the lace on the wedding dress came from Gossard remnants. I end here right now with just a slide of some of the women who worked at the Gossard. I wish I could show you more of them. They are remarkable people who are no longer invisible. Their stories are out in the world for people like me and you to know all that they did to keep their families, the local businesses, and to stand up for themselves when they needed to stand up for themselves. It is a remarkable story, and I thank you very much for listening.
Phyllis, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So interesting. Our chat box is just flowing with conversation, and folks who one person who had just been reading your book and didn't even know about this until today,
Oh,
and who joined us, and then other folks
okay.
who love the Gossard brand. And so we've got some questions. If you want to turn off your slide sharing.
Okay, stop share. Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
Okay.
So let me ask you some questions. Joanne is asking, did the factory convert to military manufacturing of soldiers' uniforms, etc., during World War II?
Yes, absolutely. And for those people who are chiming in from the UK, those parachutes and other things were for the British Navy.
Wow.
Yes. And
And
I did talk to workers actually in Ishpeming, because that was the only factory at that time. And they did tell me that they did work on those kinds of things, undergarments for the women.
the photos that you showed of the workrooms of the factory floor, it's almost as if you can smell, and not in a bad way, but smell what that must have been like with the machine oil and the garments and the,
Yeah.
it's so visceral.
And think about the heat generated from all
Right.
of those machines going nonstop until the electricity was turned off so people and machines could rest.
Yeah.
Windows were open even in the wintertime, again, because of the accumulative heat from machines and humans.
And as someone commented, they're all wearing dresses. There's nobody in comfortable sweatpants or like
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
different work environment.
There was no dress code at the time. I did ask them that. So, generally they wore what they wanted to wear. Obviously, in the 60s and 70s, they were even more casual attire by the
Right.
great workers.
But no dress code. Interesting.
Yes.
Um, so Sandra is asking, can you elaborate on the types of fabrics that were used? Was Gossard a high-end undergarment manufacturer?
Well, first of all, I will say that Gossard was a high-end manufacturer product, high-end. There were very, very strict guidelines about number of stitches per inch, a pucker. If that did not meet the inspector's eyesight, and this little tool that she used, a metal tool in which she measured the seams.
Wow.
Yes, yes. So it was very strict. And the Gossard prided itself on making quality stuff. They didn't back away from saying, that, all right, this is expensive, but you are getting top-notch undergarments. So where I don't really know, because at this particular factory in Ishpeming, the materials and garments came from lower Michigan and the Chicago area, where there were warehouses and where the main office would select the fabrics. But they were very, very nice fabrics, satins, damask, and lots of others that I don't know, but including cotton, because cotton was an important piece in a woman's undergarment.
Right. And less used now. Now it's much
Yes.
more
Yes.
synthetics. A different Sandra is asking about the quilt's construction. Are the quilts 3 layers? And if so, what is used for or also what is used for the batting or the wadding?
So I believe all but one has 3 layers. And there is a kind of batting in the last one where it was on the wall. That is really what I would call more of a quilt kind of that you just put on the top of your bed. But the doll quilt had a very, very thin layer inside. And to be honest, I don't know what the Gossard Memorial Quilt has on the inside. But yes, it does have something inside. So I apologize, I don't have that information.
Mary's asking, are there many remaining garments from Gossard? Well, I'm sure there are. Does anybody on the call have any Gossard garments in their collection? That would be interesting. One person did mention that she was familiar. Marilyn, was that you? You were mentioning that you that you liked that brand and you thought highly of it. I know there was a lingerie factory I mentioned on the chat in my town, and I still find those garments in thrift stores.
Yes.
Um,
I still occasionally get things. I should have brought it down to hold up to show everybody. Actually, a box, original box. and a bra in it with the price tag on it that says Gossard.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I use it when I go to give talks because I know how much people want to see and touch.
Yeah. This isn't a question, but Jane mentions, and I don't know if everybody can see all these comments. Some folks, yep, it just came to the host and panelists. She said it reminds me of folks who were working piece rate at a Laura Ashley factory in Wales in the 1980s. Was that you, Jane, or
Oh.
someone you knew? That's great.
Mm-hmm.
And Lynn,
I think there was a Gossard factory in I'm sorry, I don't have my better notes with me, in Essex and maybe even Bristol in maybe the 70s. So the company, I like to tell the people there that the home office is in Nottingham in the UK, where it has been for a long time. It is no longer an American company.
right. Linda asks, where did the fabric come from? Interesting. Where did they source the fabric?
To be honest, I don't know. They had buyers at the home office in Chicago who would go out, but these would have been American fabrics at this particular time. They would not have been fabrics from outside of America. And I know at some point, probably when there were no more factories in America, it went other places and they sourced it from other places.
Right. Susan asks, oh, good question. Did the Gossard company condone employees taking the scraps, or were they taking them in secret? Great question.
I never was brave enough to ask them.
I know, right? I don't know if I would either. I want to make them feel bad.
But what I also want to say is that in Ishpeming, at that factory, they had a Gossard outlet store. Okay.
Oh.
Yes. So you would have discontinued fabrics, you would have threads, you would have all kinds of things, you would have zippers, and anybody, employee or non-employee, could purchase from there, and people did. I didn't tell the story. I should have told the story. There's a great story of a mom who went to one of these days of Marquette Day, no, Ishpeming days, and they bought a whole bolt of white Gossard girdle material. She dyed that whole bolt another color, probably was a beige, and reupholstered her son's car seat. She said to me, it was like gold, it was so strong. It was the best kind of material to use.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yes.
Well, we've got a couple more questions just real quickly before we've got to go. We've just got about a minute left. Nan's asking, why did Gossard locate his factories in the UP? Did they ship product out by train or by ship? And where did they, well, we talked about where they sourced the fabric, but why the UP?
Thank you for asking that question. It is a really good question since people now know about the UP, that there aren't many people there, okay? So, right. A couple of things. It was smart, astute businessmen in Ishpeming, because in 1920, that great big building, that 3-story building, which was 3-story at that time, used to be a department store, and it went bankrupt. So they had this huge, huge building there, not creating any taxes for the city. So the businessmen went on down to Chicago to talk to bankers, and the bankers, one man there had some connection to the UP. He came up to the UP when they looked at the building and saw that they could begin production in less than 2 months. Imagine that today, in less than 2 months, which they did do. And there was the supply of labor, women, their husbands were miners. They had families, they had daughters, they had wives. So, and the materials were always shipped via truck, never, ever by train, even though there was a train that always came up. from the Chicago area. And I'm not sure why, but that's the way it was.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to end, but we are going to have to end. I've got a couple slides to show, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. But Phyllis, thank you so much. What a great presentation.
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everybody out there who I wish I could see and look in their eyes and say thank you to them.
Oh, wonderful. Really, really, really fascinating. And I know that everyone who's from a mill town or has any experience with industry in their town and how it shaped the culture and is really thinking, this has made me think a lot about my hometown and the industry there. So thank you so much. And folks, we would love to have you as a member, Quilt Alliance member. We'd love for you to listen to our Running Stitch podcast too. That's something we didn't talk about. What we do have a podcast. It's called Running Stitch, and it uses excerpts diving into our QSOS oral history project. So we'd love to have you think about that. Next week on Textile Talks, we've got another real interesting one, Textiles in 3D with Sally Mavor, Barbara Schneider, and Jean Sredel. I apologize if I've mispronounced your names, presented by Sakwa. So tune in for that. And thanks, folks. Thanks so much again, Phyllis.
Thank you very, very much. It was an absolute joy and fun.
Really appreciate you.
I'm indebted
Bye,
to you.
everyone. Thank you so much for attending today. Join us back here next week, next Wednesday.
All right. Bye-bye.